In 1933, during the Depression, as 25% of Americans lined up for bread, horse racing was dying, a sport desperate for a hero. But salvation came from a battered horse nobody wanted, too short at 15.2 hands, with knobby knees and a pedigree that promised brilliance but delivered only a lazy, napping misfit. This is the true story behind how a supposed runt not only shattered records, but saved an entire sport. So how did a horse everyone dismissed become the last hope for a broken nation? The answer begins with the cold, unremarkable numbers that made Seabiscuit a punchline. Measured at just 15.2 hands, Seabiscuit stood nearly a full hand shorter than the average thoroughbred champion. His body was rectangular and blocky, with short legs and knees that seemed to belong on a plough horse, not a racehorse. Stable hands joked that he looked more like a cow pony than a blue-blooded runner. The tape measure didn't lie. Seabiscuit was built for chores, not glory. Yet his pedigree told a different story. His sire, Hardtack, was notorious for his foul mood and unpredictable outbursts, biting, kicking, and sometimes refusing to leave the gate at all. Hardtack himself was the son of Man o' War, the legend whose name still echoed through every stable in America. On his dam side, Swing On brought a quieter temperament but little distinction. On paper, Seabiscuit was supposed to inherit greatness. In the flesh, he seemed to collect only the worst, the stubbornness of his father, the bulk of his mother, and none of the grace that made his grandfather a legend. Temperament was another problem entirely. Seabiscuit preferred sleeping to training. He would stretch out in his stall, eyes half closed, while grooms tried to coax him to his feet. Food was his real passion. He ate with the slow, methodical patience of a horse who knew he wasn't going anywhere fast. When forced onto the track, he plodded through workouts as if he had all the time in the world. Trainers logged his laziness in stable records, noting his lack of spark and his habit of ignoring commands. On every chart from height to attitude, Seabiscuit failed the champion's test. But numbers and bloodlines only told part of the story. What they missed was the stubborn core that would, against all odds, carry him farther than anyone dared imagine. The racing ledgers tell a story that sounds more like a bookkeeping error than the record of a champion. 89 starts, an exhausting number for any horse, let alone one built like a farmhand's mount. Out of those, 33 ended in victory, with 15 seconds and 13 thirds stacked alongside. By the time he retired, Seabiscuit had earned $437,730, a world record for the era. The numbers do not square with the horse described in the barn notes. Grooms logged his daily routine: nap, eat, repeat. He had to be hauled to his feet for training, and even then he would shuffle to the track as if he would rather be anywhere else. Trainers joked that he was the only horse who needed to be woken up for breakfast. The daily racing form marked him as a statistical puzzle. A horse with that many starts should have been worn out or broken down, not racking up wins and earnings. Yet, for every flash of speed on the ledger, there was a matching entry in the stable book. Seabiscuit, flat out in his straw, ignoring the world. He once slept through a thunderstorm that sent the rest of the barn into a frenzy. Feed buckets vanished in minutes, but when it came time to work, he moved at his own pace, slow, stubborn, and unimpressed by the urgency of men with stopwatches. No one could explain how a horse so indifferent to training could pile up such numbers. The contradiction gnawed at every expert who saw his chart. Was he hiding something, or was he simply too lazy to care? The only certainty was that the numbers did not add up, at least not in any way the racing world understood. At Wheatley Stable, the clock never stopped ticking. Seabiscuit's juvenile campaign was a relentless march from one starting gate to the next. 35 starts in a single season, an ordeal that would have tested even the soundest, most willing horse. On some weeks he raced twice, carted from track to track with barely a day's rest. The stable's philosophy, set by trainer Sonny Jim Fitzsimmons, was simple: work the weight off and run the laziness out. Each morning brought another punishing gallop. Another lap meant to strip away the softness and force discipline into a stubborn body. Fitzsimmons had an eye for talent, but no patience for a horse that would rather nap than train. The solution was to grind Seabiscuit down, hoping that somewhere beneath the bulk and boredom a racehorse would emerge. Feed was rationed, workouts grew longer, and the races never let up. The goal was not just fitness, it was transformation by exhaustion. The toll showed in the records. Seabiscuit lost his first 17 races, running in fields packed with sharper, more eager colts. The racing charts from that summer read like a string of disappointments, slow out of the gate, fading late, finishing well behind. Each defeat added another layer of frustration. By midsummer, he was used mostly as a workmate for the stable's true prospects, trotting alongside the favourites to sharpen their edge. The grind did nothing to ignite a spark. Instead, it left Seabiscuit hollowed out. He returned from races with a dull eye and a sour mood, pacing in his stall, refusing grain, snapping at handlers. The stable's logbooks began to note his growing stubbornness and the way he seemed to shrink into himself after each loss. The harder they pushed, the more he withdrew. By the end of his 2-year-old season, the numbers told a grim story. 35 starts, a single win, and a reputation as a horse too lazy and too worn down to care. In a sport obsessed with speed and spirit, Seabiscuit was labelled a doody, overworked, overlooked, and left behind by the very system meant to shape champions. A $2,500 claim tag dangled from Seabiscuit's name, a number that spoke louder than any pedigree. In the world of horse racing, that price was a scarlet letter, a public declaration that the stable would let him go for next to nothing. Each race program listed the tag in black and white, inviting anyone with the cash to take him home. Trainers and owners flipped through claim sheets, scanning past his name with barely a pause. The press caught on too. Headlines and columns turned him into a punchline, the blue-blooded failure, the man-o'-war grandson who couldn't outrun a field of bargain bin claimers. Seabiscuit's losing streak stretched to 17 straight races. The numbers were brutal, but the toll ran deeper than the record books. In the barn, he became a fixture of frustration. He would stand at the back of his stall, ears flat, refusing to touch his grain. Some days he paced in tight, anxious circles, wearing a groove into the straw. Grooms tried coaxing him with apples or a gentle word, but he met kindness with a blank stare. The harder they pushed, the more he retreated into himself. The claiming races themselves were a kind of purgatory. These were the bottom rungs of the sport, where horses changed hands like used cars and reputations were made or broken on a single bad trip. Every time Seabiscuit entered one, the risk was clear. Any rival stable could claim him for the listed price, no questions asked. Yet no one bit. Not after 17 losses, not after seeing the way he sulked behind the starting gate or quit halfway through a stretch run. The racing world had made up its mind. He was a hack, a cheap workmate for better horses, a shadow in the parade ring. By the summer of 1936, Seabiscuit's market value had collapsed. Wheatley Stable, once proud of his lineage, now saw only a liability on the ledger. The decision to sell was no act of hope, it was resignation. In the stall, the horse that had once been a breeder's dream now stood silent, battered by the grind, ignored by buyers, and nearly invisible to the world that had so easily discarded him. Charles Howard signed the bill of sale for $8,000 in August 1936, and just like that, the horse nobody wanted belonged to a man nursing wounds no one could see. Howard, a Buick dealer turned millionaire, had lost his only son in a car accident a decade earlier. Grief followed him everywhere, silent and stubborn, much like the animal he had just bought. The ledger at Saratoga lists the transfer in neat, impersonal script, but for Howard this was no ordinary purchase. He was not shopping for a champion. He was searching for something to mend a heart that refused to heal. He did not trust the usual trainers. Instead, he hired Tom Smith, a man who spent more time in the stalls than in the clubhouse. Smith walked the shed rows at dawn, boots caked with hay and mud, studying horses the way a doctor studies a patient's eyes. He took one look at Seabiscuit and saw what others missed. When asked about the horse's sullen temper, Smith shrugged and said that the horse is not mean, he is just insulted. He believed the animal's spirit had not been broken by laziness, but by misunderstanding, by years of being pushed and prodded by people who never bothered to listen. For a jockey, Howard and Smith found Red Pollard. He was a drifter with a battered face and a body held together by willpower and tape. Pollard had once boxed for money and lost the sight in one eye, though few knew it. He carried books of poetry in his pocket and drank more than was wise. The racing world called him a has-been, but Howard saw a kindred soul, someone who had been knocked down and kept getting up even when he did not know why. Their first meeting played out in the shadows of the stall. Seabiscuit lunged, teeth bared, ears pinned back in warning. Pollard did not flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and offered a sugar cube, palm open and steady. The horse paused, nostrils flaring, then took the treat. No words passed, but something changed. In that quiet, awkward moment, a bond formed. Not of triumph or glory, but of mutual need. Both man and horse were bruised, stubborn, and overlooked. Both had nothing left to lose. Howard, Smith, and Pollard did not talk much about dreams. They worked in silence, each bringing their own scars to the project. The plan was not to chase trophies. It was to see if something broken could be made whole again. The $8,000 horse, the cowboy who talked to animals, and the half-blind jockey formed an alliance built on patience, trust, and the hope that second chances were possible, even for those the world had already written off. Tom Smith didn't reach for a whip or a stopwatch. Instead, he brought a goat named Whiskers into the stall. The goat's steady company calmed Seabiscuit's nerves and broke the cycle of anger that had settled in his bones. Smith swapped out old oats for sweet-smelling Timothy hay, let the horse sleep as long as he wanted, and watched closely for signs of boredom. He saw that Seabiscuit wasn't lazy. He was starved for purpose. Training took on a new shape. Instead of grinding out endless laps, Smith lined up slow horses against Seabiscuit in private races. Each time, Seabiscuit crossed the wire first. The wins weren't about speed, they were about memory. With every easy victory, the horse's ears pricked a little higher. His stride lengthened. The old anger faded, replaced by something closer to curiosity. Pollard, who understood what it meant to be overlooked, whispered encouragement and read poetry aloud on long walks. The barn became a place of quiet routines and second chances. The team shipped out to Detroit for the Governor's Handicap at the end of 1936. Seabiscuit, rested and ready, broke well and didn't quit. He powered home in front, earning $5,600 and surprising the racing world. The Scarsdale Handicap soon followed with another determined finish and a winner's purse of $7,300. The horse who once sulked in his stall now fought through the stretch, ears pinned, eyes sharp. The record books began to take notice. By the spring of 1937, Seabiscuit was no longer a punchline. He ran 15 times that year and won 11, a feat that turned tracks from California to Massachusetts into packed houses. Crowds lined the rails, drawn by stories of the little horse with the goat in his stall and a poet on his back. Newspapers called him the West Coast Champion, but the old guard in New York and Maryland sneered, calling him a California claimer. He didn't look the part, and his early failures clung to his reputation. The more he won, the more the Eastern racing elite dug in their heels. The Santa Anita Handicap, known as the 100 Grander, was the richest race in the country. Seabiscuit was flying down the stretch, Pollard urging him on. But in the final yards, Rosemont slipped through on Pollard's blindside. The finish was so close the crowd held its breath for the photo. Seabiscuit lost by a nose. The moment stung. Pollard blamed himself, knowing his hidden blindness had cost them the race. But Smith and Howard didn't waver. They saw something in Seabiscuit's fight, a hunger that couldn't be measured by inches or odds. The runt had become a contender, and the racing world was starting to feel it. The West Coast crowds packed the grandstands, waving homemade banners for Seabiscuit, while the racing establishment on the East snickered behind their newspapers. In the eyes of New York's turf writers, California was a backwater, and Seabiscuit's string of victories meant little compared to the blue-blooded stakes of Saratoga or Belmont. Headlines dripped with condescension. The California Claimer, Howard's handicapper, not in War Admiral's league. The message was clear. Seabiscuit was a curiosity, not a contender. War Admiral, meanwhile, was the toast of the East. The 1937 Triple Crown winner, bred and owned by Samuel Riddle, stood as a living monument to racing's old money. His dark bay coat gleamed, his stride was silk, and his bloodline traced straight back to Man-O-War. Newspapers called him the Admiral and the Pride of the East. His victories were treated as foregone conclusions, his reputation burnished with every column inch. When talk of a match race surfaced, Riddle scoffed. Reporters pressed him on the possibility of pitting his champion against Seabiscuit. He waved them off, dismissing the notion that a horse who once ran claiming races was worthy of sharing a starting line with War Admiral. Riddle told the press to let him win a few real races first, and his words landed like a slap across the country. To him, Seabiscuit was just a good handicapper, not a classic horse, certainly not in the same class as his own Triple Crown star. The snub was not lost on the public. Letters to sports editors poured in from coast to coast. Fans demanded a showdown, their voices swelling in the columns of the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Daily Racing Form. Cartoonists had a field day, sketching Seabiscuit in patched-up blinkers, squaring off against War Admiral in a top hat and monocle. The rivalry became something bigger than two horses. It was East versus West, privilege versus grit, aristocrat versus upstart. Every insult from the Eastern press only fueled the fire. By the summer of 1938, the pressure was impossible to ignore. Seabiscuit's name was everywhere. He was the headliner, the underdog, the horse who refused to fit the mold. Riddle's refusals, repeated in print and on radio, only made the demand louder. As one syndicated columnist put it, "The country wants a race, Mr. Riddle. The country wants to see if a little horse from nowhere can take down a king." The standoff had become a national spectacle. The more the establishment sneered, the more the public rallied. Seabiscuit was no longer just a horse, he was a cause. The match race was not just about speed, it was about pride, class, and the right to belong at the very top of the sport. May 1938 brought a shattering blow. During a routine morning workout, Red Pollard was thrown and pinned beneath a runaway horse. His leg snapped with a sickening crack, a compound fracture that pierced the skin. The hospital called it a career-ending injury. For days, Pollard drifted in and out of morphine sleep, and the future of both man and horse felt suddenly unmoored. Seabiscuit, restless without his rider, paced his stall and refused his grain. The press caught wind quickly, and headlines asked, was the dream over before it began? But the match race everyone wanted still hung in the balance. After months of public demands and private letters, Samuel Riddle finally agreed to the contest, but only if it ran on his terms. There would be no starting gate at Pimlico. War Admiral had a reputation for balking at the clang of metal gates, so the contract spelled it out, a walk-up start, just two horses nose to nose, with no mechanical trigger. The clause was clear in the correspondence between the Howard and Riddle camps. For Seabiscuit's team, it meant abandoning the familiar rhythm of the starting bell, a detail that forced Tom Smith to rethink every aspect of their race day plan. With Pollard's leg in a cast, Charles Howard turned to George Wolfe, known on the circuit as the Iceman, for his calm under pressure. Wolfe was a close friend of Pollard's, a diabetic who managed his illness with quiet discipline and the same steady hand he brought to the saddle. The substitution was more than a change of jockey. It was a handoff between men who understood the weight of the moment. From his hospital bed, Pollard gave Wolfe the only instructions he could manage: how to feel the horse's stride, when to let him loose, how to read the race. Not with the eyes, but with the hands and heart. The stakes were set. Seabiscuit would face War Admiral at Pimlico with the eyes of the nation fixed on a single stretch of dirt. The walk-up start, the new partnership with Wolfe, and the shadow of Pollard's injury all became part of the gamble. Every detail, from contract letters to medical records, underscored what the rivalry had already cost and how much more was on the line when the horses finally met at the wire. On the morning of November 1st, 1938, the air in America felt charged. In barbershops, diners, and living rooms from coast to coast, radios flickered to life. Nearly 40 million people, 1 in every 3 Americans, tuned in, waiting for a signal. At the White House, President Roosevelt, a racing fan, reportedly paused his cabinet meeting so he could listen. For a few rare minutes, the Depression's worries faded as the country held its breath. The broadcast crackled with static and anticipation. Announcer Clem McCarthy's voice carried across the nation, painting every detail for listeners who could not see the Pimlico racetrack. In Baltimore, the grandstands overflowed, but it was the invisible audience that set this day apart. No other sporting event had drawn such a crowd over the airwaves. The matchup had become more than a race. It was a national event, a test of grit and hope that reached from the Oval Office to the smallest farm town. Behind the scenes, Tom Smith worked quietly, trusting in a plan he had kept secret. For weeks, he had trained Seabiscuit to respond to a bell. Each morning, the horse would stand in the chill dawn, waiting. When Smith rang a homemade bell, Seabiscuit would launch forward, conditioned to explode off the mark at that sound. The trick was simple, but it was Smith's answer to the walk-up start, because War Admiral's camp had refused a starting gate. Smith turned the change into an advantage, embedding the bell's cue deep in Seabiscuit's mind. As the horses circled, tension rippled through the crowd and across millions of unseen listeners. The bell, so ordinary in training, would now decide the fate of 2 champions. McCarthy's voice rose as the horses lined up, describing every twitch and snort. The country listened for the bell, knowing that in the next instant, history would break loose. In that moment, the race belonged to everyone. From the president's office to the last stool at the corner lunch counter, America was united by a single sound, waiting to see if a battered little horse could outrun destiny. The bell rang, and Seabiscuit flew from the line. War Admiral, the Triple Crown champion, was supposed to be the faster horse, the one who would seize the lead and never look back. But George Wolfe, cool as ice, let Seabiscuit roll straight into the first turn with his ears pricked and his stride opening up. The little horse, who was once too lazy to rise for breakfast, now powered down the Pimlico backstretch, matching War Admiral stride for stride. Through the first half-mile, the 2 horses ran side by side, hooves pounding in sync, neither giving an inch. The crowd's roar built with every stride, but on the track, Wolfe waited. He remembered Red Pollard's words from the hospital bed. "Let War Admiral catch him. Look him in the eye. Then let him go." At the far turn, War Admiral crept closer, drawing even. For a moment, the 2 were so close their shadows merged. Seabiscuit's head swung, and he locked eyes with his rival. The finish photo would later capture that moment. 2 champions, nostrils flared, necks stretched, each refusing to blink first. Wolf loosened his grip on the reins. Seabiscuit felt the freedom, and he surged forward, and in a heartbeat the race changed. The little horse who had once been dismissed as a hack found another gear. He began to pull away, first by a nose, then by a length, then by 2 lengths. War Admiral, unbeaten in match races, could not answer. Seabiscuit's stride grew longer, his legs churning with a power no one had believed possible. Down the stretch, the gap widened. By the time they hit the wire, Seabiscuit was 4 lengths clear. The timing sheet showed 1 minute 56 and 2/5 seconds for 1 mile and 3/16, a new track record. The finish was not just a win, it was a rout. The crowd erupted, hats flying, grown men shouting themselves hoarse. Reporters scrambled for the best angle, but the story was already written in the numbers. 4 lengths, a new record, and a victory that belonged to every underdog who had ever been counted out. That night, Seabiscuit was named Horse of the Year. The runt with knobby knees had beaten the champion at his own game, and in the process, sealed his place as the people's horse. In an era when perfection is marketed as necessity, Seabiscuit's legacy is proof that grit often outpaces pedigree. Today, thoroughbreds still chase his records, and underdogs everywhere find hope in his story. He drew more headlines than world leaders because people recognized themselves in his struggle and his triumph. Sometimes, the least likely champion becomes the one who endures. What odds are you willing to defy? Share your thoughts in the comments below.